Hello again, everyone. It's yet another day in the life of a military wife, and I think it would be really difficult to not be aware of the significance of what this weekend is going to represent, and the fact that this Saturday is the 20th anniversary of September 11th, 2001. And for everyone I know, at least, who was alive and old enough to remember that day, a lot changed. A lot happened. But sometimes with the passage of time, we forget things, or we remember them differently, or we wonder if we're remembering them the same. I want to unpack it a little bit. I want to talk about it. There's a lot going on in the world right now that makes this pertinent to not only military families, but everyone. Because that one event that day, well, not one event, those events that day really did change our world and impact the world we live in now. With that said, I am your host, Sam Wolf, and this is Life of a Military Wife. Okay, in addressing this, I really can only address this from what I know through research and what I lived. Again, there are quite a few people who are now adults and even service members who were not alive or were very young children when this happened. And so they may not have memories of this. I was not a young child. I was old enough to really, in a lot of ways, grasp what was going on. I did not live on the East Coast, so it was very early in the morning when news reports started filtering in, and I still remember I heard about it on my way to class, and class just didn't happen that day. Everything just froze. It was just one of the strangest experiences. I remember talking with a professor later on about it, and he said that he didn't cancel his classes that day because he wanted his students to have a place where they could talk about it and process it and not just be in their dorm rooms worrying. And he remembers taking them out into the field and having them look up into the sky and asking what they didn't see. And they didn't see the jet lines from the airplanes up in the sky because everything had been grounded. And it really was a surreal experience. And there's a song that I encountered years later that really very powerfully encapsulates the way it was kind of a really overwhelming, hard thing to deal with, because it was harder for the people who were there, I guarantee it. But there was firefighters from all over the nation going to help dig through the rubble. This was not a New York problem. This was not a New York thing. This was an American thing. And just the surge of patriotism, the donations of blood, the volunteering, just everything that happened. I've never seen the U.S. flag waved so much, so frequently in my entire life as I did at that point. And the song, it's from Daryl Worsley. It's Have You Forgotten? And it's like, have you forgotten how it felt that day to see your homeland under fire and her people blown away? Have you forgotten when those towers fell? When we had neighbors still inside going through living hell? And I just, I don't, it's hard sometimes to realize that there are adults that I talk to that don't remember. They don't remember because they weren't here. They weren't there for it, or they were young children. And I think that is kind of a distinction between the old school military, and I say old school as in the ones who served in the early 2000s all the way up until the 20 teens, and some of the ones that are getting in now. Because every person I've asked who served in those early years, every single person who served when we first got in years ago, single-handedly, they'd say the reason why they were still in the Army, or the reason why they joined, or Air Force, why they joined the Air Force, or whatever, single-handedly, Navy, actually, yeah, everything. Every person I've talked to, every single one of them has said they joined because of September 11th. In fact, a very close friend of mine, her husband was serving as a missionary for his church in New Jersey, just across the river from Lower Manhattan. And he remembers standing on the roof of his apartment building as a missionary and watching the towers fall. And the moment he got home from his mission, he enlisted in the Army. They hit the Pentagon. There were some really brave people on an amazing flight that stopped them from hitting potentially our capital. It's something that if you weren't alive for, I really recommend you find out, especially if you're an adult. I mean, not young kids. There's so much my kids don't understand about this because they're kids. But if you're an adult and you weren't alive that day, there are some things you need to look into to really understand the world you're living in. Because I remember the world before this happened. And we live in a very different world now. TSA wasn't a thing, first of all. Just to be a little lighthearted for a second, TSA was not a thing at all. I remember as a kid, one of my family members was flying through, who lived in a different state, was flying through where we lived. And my mom pulled us, she let us go to school late because we went up to their gate to hang out with them by their gate. And while they had their layover before they had to leave, it was like an hour layover. And we just walked right in. Like, you could walk right up to the gates and you could hang out with family members during their layovers. And you didn't have to take your shoes off or worry about your belt buckle or getting patted down. I remember the outcry and the anger people had when they realized that people were going to be leaving like full body scans of them and everything. People were afraid to fly for a while. Like, I maybe this is just my perspective, but I know some people have been concerned to fly because of COVID, but it was nothing like the fear of flying after September 11th. There was a lot of hesitation for people to get back on those airplanes after what had happened, and a lot of concern about how they were going to keep that safe. And that's part of why TSA exists now, and marshals and air marshals and all of that. Like, just that alone changed our world. But not only that, immigration policies changed, military changed. There was a lot that changed because of September 11th. And I don't know if you are aware, but there was two French brothers, Jules and Dieudonné Nadet, and I'm probably pronouncing those wrong because my French is not perfect. But these two brothers were making a documentary on what it was like to be a probie or a first-year firefighter in New York. And they had gotten permits to film in the World Trade Center and all over because the probie or first-year firefighter they were doing the documentary about was assigned to the fire station that covered the Twin Towers. And so there's footage from before September 11th of them doing calls with the probie at the Twin Towers and everything. But what also happened was that these two brothers were still in the process of making this documentary when September 11th happened. And they were actually inside. One of them specifically, I know for sure, was inside one of the towers when the second tower was struck, and inside the lobby when the first tower fell. They went with the firefighters up and down the stairs rescuing people. And that footage, that documentary, still exists. It's a 22 film called 9/11. And for anyone who is an adult who does not remember that day, it is not an easy watch. Trust me. I had to watch it for a school assignment just years afterwards when it first came out. But it's something that I think we need to understand. And I think sometimes in American culture, for lots of different reasons, we edit our history to make it less traumatic. And I agree that children should be given abbreviated forms of history until they are adults and able to handle history. Because you kind of have to progress, like step by step, help them understand things. I remember as a teenager being expected to watch a Holocaust video where they showed the first arrival onto one of the concentration camps. And it was too much for me to handle as a young teenager, as a 14-year-old. I asked my teacher to please be excused. Not because I didn't want to acknowledge what happened, but because those images were too much for me to handle at the time. As an adult since then, I have seen a lot of that same footage again, and it is still hard to watch, and it is still disturbing. But I feel like I'm able to process and handle it a little bit better as an adult. And that's kind of where I'm getting at with this, is if you never saw it as a kid, there's probably a reason. But if you're not a kid anymore, this is something you need to be aware of. Now, how does this factor into what I normally talk about, which is military and military life? I kind of touched on it before. A lot of the military, the current military, not the, no offense, are young little E1s and zeros that are getting in, or even our spanking brand new O1s. Most of the existing military who've been in for years got in for a reason. We got in because, or our spouses got in because of September 11th. Because what started off as a you don't mess with the USA very quickly turned into a, oh my goodness, what the crud, what the heck have these people been doing in this country for so long? And the more that these soldiers, and I've read accounts of specifically female medics in Afghanistan the more they saw the lives that these people were being subjected to, the more they're like, this isn't just about September 11th anymore. This is about freedom for these people. No one should have to live this way. And with everything that's going on right now, I feel like it's important to talk about the impact that September 11th, the war in Afghanistan, had for these people. In particular, there is an amazing woman. Her family fled and her family fled Afghanistan in 1996 and became refugees in Pakistan, Bhopal, and in there she became a soccer player. And when it happened, she came back, when the liberation of Afghanistan happened, when her country was freed, she came back. In 2007, she played a key role in establishing the first Afghanistan women's international team for soccer. And she came back because she wanted the women in her country to have this opportunity. And it was just amazing what this team, the national soccer team, accomplished. The games they played, how well they did, something they'd never been allowed to do before. Women had never been allowed to play sports under the Taliban, but they were able to start this legacy of pride. And sadly, it's all over. It's all gone. Those women aren't gone, though. Their legacy is not gone. What they achieved is not gone. But it is no longer allowed in Afghanistan. That freedom, that opportunity to be themselves and to play a sport that they loved and to do it without worrying about the safety of their lives or their family is gone. Women's education in Afghanistan. In 2020, a young woman in Afghanistan received the highest score out of 170,000 students in the entrance exam for the national university. A girl. Before September 11th, that would have never been possible because she wouldn't have been allowed to go to school, let alone take an entrance exam to go to a university. No women, females, girls, anyone was allowed to work or attend school under the Taliban's rule before 2001. By 2018, girls made up almost 38% of students in the country. By comparison, only 5,000 Afghan girls were enrolled in school before 2001. Education cannot be taken away from those women, those girls. There's a whole generation of women now who have received an education, who have the ability to read and write and learn for themselves because of the sacrifices that were made for their country. The reasons why we went there originally may have been different, but the reasons why those soldiers, a lot of soldiers I've spoken to, especially female soldiers, were so committed to helping them was for those girls, for those women, for that whole generation, to be able to hold jobs, to go to school, to play sports. Recently, there's been reports of coming out where they say that, oh, we're still going to let them go to school and yada, 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 but we just don't want them to go right now because it's not safe. That's what they said before. That is literally what the Taliban said before. There is an journalist, and forgive me now, I will put her name down and I will link it. I will find the article. She was working for a TV station in Kabul, and she is the only female reporter ever to interview a member of the Taliban and live. She was, in her own words, grateful that that day she had chose to wear the full, headscarf, everything, full length, everything. But in walked in a member of the Taliban and insisted that he be interviewed. And she was told to interview him. And she did. She interviewed him, and everything was fine. And after that, they were told that all the women were to be let go at all the other stations, or they had to be dressing modestly. And eventually they were all told that they had to be let go. Luckily, she was able to get out of the country, and so she's now safe. But she herself firmly said that she believed she would not have been safe if she had stayed in the country. Another female reporter was on her way to, with the escort, and I think I've talked about this one before. Maybe I'm not. I've just been talking about this a lot lately within my life in general. She was on the way to the airport, and again, I will find these names and I will place them in the, description below. But another female reporter was on her way to the Kabul airport under escort of two male family members, her brother and her cousin, when the bomb went off and they were killed. The reason why they were headed to the airport was for her safety, to get her out of the country, because as a well-known female reporter, her life was at risk. There's a lot going down in that country that is hard to swallow right now and hard to handle. But I feel like it's important to remember that all that was done was not done in vain because of the sacrifices made. There are people who gained an education that would not have been able to, who played sports, who held jobs, who accomplished things. So, kind of wrap things up because it's been a little bit heavy. But September 11th, 2001, in the World Trade Center, and this is just hard to say. These numbers are hard to say. At the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, over 2,753 people were killed. $343 were New York City firefighters. 23 were New York City police officers. 37 were officers of the Port Authority. The victims' age range was from 2 years old to 85. 75 to 80% were men. At the Pentagon, 184 people were killed when the American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the building. Near Shakesville, Pennsylvania, 40 passengers and crew were killed when the plane crashed, they were heroes because they stopped it. They stopped the hijackers from hitting their unknown target. As of October 2019, only 60% of the victims of the World Trade Center had been positively identified. Now, they weren't soldiers. They weren't special forces. The people inside those towers were civilian office workers. And the 343 firefighters were there to save lives. The 23 police officers, 37, wow, my numbers are getting mixed up. My 23 New York police officers and 37 Port Authority. Port Authority? I'm not even sure they carry guns. I know that the firefighters don't. Like, they ran inside those towers. They ran inside towers to get people out, knowing they may not get out themselves. I really, really recommend you watch that documentary, because there is no way you will understand the courage and bravery and selfless sacrifice that took until you've walked their shoes with them. And even then, you won't completely understand it. Because almost 400 of them never made it out. This isn't about optics. This isn't about politics. This isn't about public policy. This is about people. I saw Ground Zero when it was still rubble. I saw it myself in person. I've met people who lost people that day. For those who were old enough to remember, I can't imagine them actually forgetting. It changed our world. It changed the way we view freedom. It changed the way we travel. It changed a lot. I do think good came out of it for all of those women who got to play sports and go to school and hold jobs. Now that some of those women and their families are coming to new countries to start over again, let's love them. Anyway, that is a really... whew. Again, I need to start picking some more happy-go-lucky stuff because it's been a little heavy lately. Just gonna say that. Just a little bit intense lately. I didn't even share a tenth of the stuff I wanted to share. I will link all my resources, as always. But this is why. This is why we're military families. Because freedom is important to us. And it doesn't come free. It doesn't come free at all. And as a woman in a country where I have the ability to have received an education, to have gone to a university, to have graduated from a university, to work if I choose to work, to have played sports and participated in theater and have a podcast and speak my mind, I understand that I am blessed. And I am grateful for everyone who sacrificed their life and their time with their families to give me that freedom. And to give that freedom to other women out there. Because not everyone has it. And it is not free. When they died for me. They died so that I could be free. What am I going to do with that freedom? What are you going to do with yours? Think about it. I'm your host, Sam Wolf, and this is Life of a Military Wife.